In the heart of Africa, nestled among rolling hills and lush forests, lay the village of Odem. The village was a vibrant tapestry of traditions, stories, and resilient people. It was a place where the past and present intertwined, where every whisper of the wind carried the echoes of ancestral spirits, and where every corner of the land held a tale waiting to be told. Odem had seen many seasons of peace and prosperity, but it had also endured the ravages of war. The Great Tribal War had left deep scars on the village and its people. Lives were lost, homes were destroyed, and the soul of the community was forever altered. Among the survivors of this devastating conflict was a woman named Uju. Uju was a beacon of beauty and grace, with a heart as pure as the clear streams that flowed through Odem. Her life had been marked by tragedy from a young age. She had barely survived the war that claimed the lives of her parents and siblings. Alone and heartbroken, she wandered until she found refuge in Odem. Here, she hoped to rebuild her life and find a semblance of peace. In Odem, Uju met Emeka, a handsome and kind-hearted man from the royal bloodline. Emeka was drawn to Uju's strength and resilience, and they soon fell deeply in love. Their union was a source of envy and admiration in the village. Despite the lingering shadows of her past, Uju believed she had found her sanctuary in Emeka's arms. However, not everyone in Odem wished Uju well. The envy, jealousy, and wickedness of some villagers cast a dark cloud over her happiness. Despite these challenges, Uju and Emeka's love remained steadfast, and they were blessed with 7 beautiful children, 5 girls and 2 boys. Their home was filled with laughter, joy, and the sweet melodies of childhood. But peace was fleeting in Odem. The village's tranquility was shattered one fateful day during a village meeting. Unbeknownst to Emeka, the king's men had conspired against him. They poisoned his drink, and he returned home that evening, vomiting blood. Uju's world crumbled as she watched her beloved husband succumb to the treachery. The pain of losing Emeka was unbearable, and Uju's cries of anguish echoed through the village as they buried him. Now a widow, Uju was left to care for her 7 children alone. The villagers' malice intensified, and every night Uju lay awake, haunted by the cries of demonic birds and other ominous creatures that gathered outside her window. Yet, she remained resilient, drawing strength from her love for her children and her unwavering faith. In the days that followed Emeka's death, Uju's life became a constant struggle. Each day brought new challenges and threats from the villagers who resented her. Despite this, Uju continued to nurture her children, determined to protect them from the malevolence that surrounded them. One morning, as the sun rose over Odem, Uju found herself facing yet another test of her strength and faith. Little did she know, the events of that day would set in motion a series of tragic and miraculous occurrences that would forever change her life and the fate of her children. Uju's resilience was tested daily in the village of Odem. The bitterness and envy that some villagers harbored towards her seemed to grow with each passing day. Despite her hardships, Uju remained a loving mother, dedicated to her children and determined to shield them from the darkness that surrounded them. Emeka's death had left a void in her life, but Uju's faith and inner strength sustained her. Each morning, she would rise before dawn to tend to her small farm and gather vegetables to feed her children. She would then spend the rest of the day teaching and playing with them, ensuring that their lives were filled with as much love and joy as possible. But the village's hostility was never far from her mind. The king's men, who had orchestrated Emeka's death, continued to watch her every move. Their eyes followed her with suspicion and malice, and Uju knew she had to be vigilant to protect her family from further harm. One evening, as Uju prepared dinner, she overheard whispers outside her window. The voices were low and menacing, filled with plots and schemes against her. Her heart raced as she listened, trying to make out the words. It was clear that the villagers were planning something terrible, but she couldn't discern the details. Determined not to let fear consume her, Uju continued with her evening routine. She gathered her children around the hearth and told them stories of courage and resilience. She spoke of their father, Emeka, and his noble spirit, hoping to instill in them the same strength and determination that had carried her through the darkest days of her life. That night, as Uju lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The cries of the demonic birds seemed louder than ever, and the air was thick with tension. She held her youngest daughter close, praying for protection and guidance. The next morning, Uju woke up to a day that would change everything. She had a strange feeling in her heart as she went about her usual tasks. Her youngest daughter, less than a year old, was particularly fussy that day. Uju tried to soothe her, but the child seemed restless, as if sensing the storm that was about to descend upon their lives. Uju decided to take her daughter with her to the farm, hoping that the fresh air would calm her. She carried the baby in one arm and pushed her old bicycle with the other, calling out to her son Obi as he returned from school. "Thank goodness you are here, come and carry your sister," she said, her voice filled with relief. "Go and play while I go to the farm to get vegetables for dinner." Obi, a bright and responsible 10-year-old, nodded and took his baby sister in his arms. Uju watched them walk away, her heart swelling with love and pride. She mounted her bicycle and rode towards the farm, unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. As Uju pedaled towards the farm, the ominous feeling in her heart grew stronger. The path to the farm was lined with tall trees that whispered secrets in the wind. Birds sang overhead, their melodies masking the sinister plans that were unfolding back in the village. Obi, carrying his baby sister, decided to visit the neighboring compound where his friend lived. The neighboring compound was bustling with activity as villagers went about their daily chores. Obi greeted everyone cheerfully, unaware of the dark intentions harbored by Ada, a woman who had recently descended into madness. Ada's madness was said to be a result of her fetish practices, a punishment from the gods for her malevolent deeds. Her family had long been involved in dark rituals, and Ada's descent into insanity had only heightened their resolve to wreak havoc on those they envied and despised. Uju and her children were prime targets. As Obi entered the neighboring compound, Ada spotted him. Her eyes gleamed with a dangerous light as she called out to him, "Obi, come here and take a biscuit." The boy hesitated, remembering his mother's warning about accepting gifts from strangers. He shook his head, politely declining the offer. But Ada was not to be deterred. She lunged forward, grabbing Obi with a strength that belied her frail appearance. In her madness, she wielded a sharp machete, cutting down Obi and his baby sister with brutal efficiency. Ada cut some part of his head and leg. Obi's cries of pain echoed through the compound as he fell, blood pooling around him. Ada reached out to her side and cut down a plantain leaf and placed the baby on the leaf as if she was a meat to be butchered. The mad woman began to cut the baby into pieces, tearing from her mouth to the ears and cutting her hands. Obi's sister, too young to understand the horror, lay lifeless beside him, her tiny body butchered by the mad woman's blade. The heavens could no longer remain silent in the face of such atrocity. Thunder roared and lightning flashed across the sky, an unnatural storm brewing in the hot afternoon. The villagers, drawn by the commotion, rushed towards the scene. Ada, sensing their approach, fled into the thick forest, leaving behind the gruesome aftermath of her madness. Meanwhile, Uju was still on her way to the farm. The sky's sudden transformation puzzled her, and an unshakable sense of dread gripped her heart. Her bicycle, which had carried her so faithfully, suddenly refused to move forward. No matter how hard she pedaled, the wheels would not turn. Frustrated and frightened, Uju dismounted and tried pushing the bicycle, but it was as if an invisible force held it in place. Desperate, she decided to turn back. The bicycle moved effortlessly in the opposite direction, urging her to return home. As Uju neared the village, she heard the anguished cries of her neighbors. Her heart pounded in her chest as she abandoned the bicycle and ran towards the sound. The villagers, their faces etched with sorrow and horror, told her the devastating news. "Your children. They are dead." Butchered by Ada. Uju fell to her knees, her world collapsing around her. The weight of her grief and rage was unbearable. She cried out to the heavens, her voice filled with agony and bitterness. Amidst her tears, she clung to a glimmer of hope as the villagers rushed Obi to the hospital. Her youngest daughter, wrapped in a cloth, was pronounced dead on arrival. The baby, deemed lifeless, was rejected by the hospital. The villagers' cries echoed through the air as they carried Uju's butchered children to the hospital. The sky above remained dark and turbulent, as if the heavens themselves mourned the innocent lives lost. Uju, confined by the villagers to prevent her from doing anything rash. The villagers who had took the baby to the hospital brought the baby back to the neighboring compound out of confusion and not knowing the next step to take, dropped the baby there on the floor and calling out to the mad woman and her family to come and eat the baby since they have butchered her like a meat. In a twist of fate, the baby, left outside in the confusion, was revived by a miraculous rain. Right there the heavens began to intervene in the affairs of men. The cloud changed, the hot afternoon turned dark, the cloud became cloudy with lightning and thunder, and a strange rain began to fall, so strange that the villagers couldn't stand the gravity of the rain. All of them took to shelter, leaving the baby on the floor, and the rain began to pour on the baby, and suddenly they heard the baby sneeze, which is an evidence of life. The baby divinely came back to life. The villagers grabbed the baby and rushed her back to the hospital. At this time, the hospital accepted her and began treatment immediately. The mad woman was captured and arrested by the police. Oju was asked by the police of the fate of the mad woman, if they should harm her or prosecute her, and she said that vengeance is of the Lord. As Uju's prayers grew more intense, subtle changes began to manifest in the village. The once hostile villagers started to experience strange occurrences, their own lives touched by the supernatural forces that seemed to protect Uju and her children. The demonic cries that plagued Uju's nights began to be heard by others as well, unsettling those who had harbored ill intentions towards her.